Hello and welcome. In this video I'm going to introduce the concepts of sites and site groups. I will explain what these two terms mean in SPC Connect and how best to use them. We will step through a demo where I will register hardware to a site and add the site to a site group. Currently, SPC Connect supports two different types of hardware: SPC alarm systems or SPC panels and Vanderbilt DVRs. In the future, however, SPC Connect might support many different types of hardware, from other types of alarm systems and DVRs to access control, door controllers or building automation hardware. To separate the hardware from the software, SPC Connect has introduced the concept of a site. A site represents a building or group of buildings which should be managed as a single entity within SPC Connect. We add matching hardware to our site. The most common site on SPC Connect will have a single SPC panel associated with it. However, we could add a DVR to this site, or indeed, for larger buildings, we might add several SPC alarm systems and DVRs. If you are managing a single site or a few sites, then managing each site individually is fine. However, once you have to manage tens, hundreds or even thousands of sites, then collective management of these sites is preferred. Site groups are used to group sites so that the sites can be configured and managed at group level. Settings apply to all sites in the group, and similarly, operations like time sync or performing a firmware upgrade can be simultaneously applied to all sites in a group. So here we are in SPC Connect, and I'm going to demonstrate sites and site groups now. We're on the dashboard here. We'll talk about this in another video, but just to show that we have some sites in the system and they're clearly displayed in the site map. For now though, we're going to focus on the configuration menus, and here under configuration we can see sites. So if I click on sites, we get a list of the sites currently added on the system. So these are the different Vanderbilt offices throughout Europe. There is one missing there, which is the Vanderbilt Ireland site, which we're now going to add. So I could add it by clicking on Add Site at the bottom here if I like. However, it's preferable just to create the site at the time of adding the hardware. So if I click on Hardware and click on Panels, I can register a new panel with the company, and as part of this then I can say this is the Dublin panel and give it a registration ID. In terms of the site then, I'm asked whether I want to assign the panel to a site, so I can either assign it to a new site or assign it to an existing site. I am going to create a new site, but I am going to change the name. By default the name picks the name of the panel here and just appends site at the end. But I'm going to call this the Vanderbilt Ireland site, and it picks up a site group. For the moment, I mean, I could assign this to the UK and Ireland site group straight away, but for the moment I'm just going to leave that blank and show how to do it manually in the next later. I then pick a username and a password and register the panel to the company. That has successfully registered the panel to the company, and it should create a site called Vanderbilt Ireland. So I now click on Configuration and Sites. We can see the Vanderbilt Ireland site with the Dublin panel, and it has no site groups. Because there's no site groups, we can see that no operations are possible on this site. So I can now go to site groups and maybe go to the UK and Ireland site group, and I can add this panel manually. As I said earlier, we could have done this automatically, but I'm just going to add it manually now to this site here. Now when I click on the sites, you can see that the Vanderbilt Ireland is now part of the UK and Ireland site group, and it has picked up then the operations that are allowed as part of that site group. I'll talk about that in a minute. But the Vanderbilt Ireland now has a Dublin panel registered with it. I'm going to add an additional panel to this just to show that it's very straightforward to add additional panels or DVRs to this site. So all I do is I click on Hardware, Panels, and register a new panel with company. I can put in the new registration ID and say this is the Dublin panel number 2. Now this time I don't want to create a new site because I want to add it to an existing site. So I select Existing Site and pick Vanderbilt Ireland. In this case, because it's going to an existing site, I don't choose what site group to add it to, because it will just pick up the site groups that that site is already in. Again, I need to add an engineer username and password though to register this. So if I register this panel with the company now, I should be able to see under configuration sites that the Ireland site now has 2 panels. And that's clearly represented by the 2 different panels under hardware. I mean, hardware isn't restricted to panels, so I could add a DVR to this particular site. So I'm now going to add an Aventus DVR here, and I'm going to call it the Dublin DVR. And the IP address is 87.198.226.130. So before I add it, I could test the connection, and it says that was okay, so I should be able to save it. And then we get a list of channels here, just to maybe enable that first channel, because it's the only one that has a camera on it. I enable the camera, and the camera comes through. So I now need to add that to a site. So if I click on my Aventus DVR here, or my configuration and sites, we add it manually to the Ireland site. So click on Ireland site, Aventus DVRs, and this is where I manually add a DVR to my site. So now the site's fully set up. However, we haven't any GPS coordinates selected for the site. So to give the site a location, I pick it up, and I've currently set up my my company's currently set up here in the middle of the Colosseum in Rome, but we can pan out from here to move it, or if you want, I could just type in here. Hit enter, and it gives a list, so I'll just pick one of these, and this should bring it nearby. You can add GPS coordinates to that search box, and when you hit enter, it'll transfer to the exact location. But the Vanderbilt office here is there, and I can right click now and just go add site marker, and it'll automatically pick an address. So I can click save. It'll now ask me, it says the panel within the site, because this is 2 panels. I just click on the first one, and it'll give me the system summary for the panel number 2. As it turns out, panel number 1 is also there, and they can both be managed within SPC Connect, and we have our DVR here as well. One other thing that I can do in a site is I can add a site to a favorite sites. Favorite sites is something that's used throughout multi-site operations and the dashboard, and it just is a list of your favorite sites. Favorite sites are particular to the user that's logged in, or the installer that's logged in. So if I look at my dashboard, I can see I currently have 2 favorite sites, so Vanderbilt Germany and Vanderbilt France. If I then click on my sites and click on Vanderbilt Ireland, I can very easily add that to the favorite sites, and now we'll have Vanderbilt Ireland here. On the dashboard there's maybe a favorite site events, and this will show events coming from any of these sites. So if I was maybe to click on the summary for Ireland and maybe set or exit full engineer mode, we'll say, and maybe full set the system, when we go back here now, we should see there some events have come through to represent what I did. We You've seen a demonstration there of sites. I'm now going to turn my attention to site groups. Site groups can be used for several reasons. They can assign or restrict access of installers to sites. They provide an easy way of configuring many sites with the same settings without having to go to each site individually. They allow operations to be performed on many sites at the same time. For example, synchronizing the time on thousands of panels at the same time. When choosing your site groups, remember that sites can be members of several site groups. So here we are back in our demo, and I'm now going to look at site groups. So if I click on the configuration menu again, and we can go down here to site groups, we can see that there's 2 site groups currently on the system. UK and Ireland is a site group that we would have configured earlier, but just for a bit of change, I'm going to look at the mainland Europe site group. The mainland Europe site group has a name and a couple of things associated with it, like notes if you wanted to create any notes with it and the date it was created. I'm not going to talk here about the auto enroll panels. The site then has 2 different settings left. It's a list of all the different sites that are part of that site group, and then a list of all the installers who have access to that site group. Any installer that has the manage all sites in company right does not need to be individually listed here. So for instance, all company managers will have this right, and then they don't need it. So you can see that I am logged in here as demo installer. I obviously have access to this site, but I'm not on that list. That is because I'm a company manager essentially. This list is for installers maybe with the standard installer profile. The explicit right that they need to have is manage all sites in company. If they have manage all sites in company, then they don't need to be on this list, otherwise they need to be on that list. This is then a list of all the sites in the company, and I can add additional sites by just clicking on add sites. In fact, I can remove them either by deselecting them if I need. I can change those. You can import them then through files either if you want, and save the settings. I'm now going to look at the feature settings of this site group. So the operation settings is here. They can also be got, from changing between site group settings and operation settings from the menu itself. But the operation settings just says what operations have been enabled and disabled on this site. And I can go down through them so you can see what's enabled and what's disabled. In this case, you can see the firmware upgrade will be disabled. And to me that will be quite typical, because firmware upgrade is a sort of operation that you'll do every so often, and for me I would prefer to set up a site group individually to do a firmware upgrade, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I can create a new site group there by clicking on new site group and just change this to firmware upgrade and save the site group. Once you save the site group, now you need to put the panels and the installers in there. I'm going to go back, and if I go into my dashboard, one of the widgets here tells you the panel firmware, and it tells me here that 6 of my panels are on 3.11 firmware and 5 are on 3.85 firmware. If I click on those 5, I can see a list of these sites that are on 3.85 firmware, and now I want to add these to my site group. There's several ways I could do it in terms of making a note and writing it down, although my own preference is to use the search fields. So if I click on the Vanderbilt UK search here, I can click on the custom search field and maybe type firmware in the box, and I can go back. Now when I go back to this list of sites, it has all the sites in it. I could just look here at the different firmware versions to find my next site, or I could put the search query back in just to find the 385s, and I can go back through the other search fields and just type FW. Okay, so I've just added the firmware search field there to each of the panels that have a 385 firmware version. You can see actually the Vanderbilt Ireland site has a 385 and a 3.11 panel, but I've added the FW anyway. Now all I need to do is go to site groups, go to my firmware upgrade site group and edit, go to add remove sites, and I can sort now by firmware upgrade, and indeed I can add these 5 sites to the site group. Click save. I can now go back to the site groups and click on operation settings, and in this case now we just need to enable the firmware upgrade, and now this site group is available to do firmware upgrade. I'm not going to go that far into the video because this video is about sites and site groups. I'm just going to finish this video by just discussing a little bit of how you should group your sites. And my answer really is it's up to the installer themselves. Really bearing in mind that they should remember that a site can be in multiple site groups. So a given site group doesn't have to do anything. As you saw in my example there of a firmware upgrade, for a firmware upgrade it might just be easier to set up a temporary site group and one-off add your sites to it, perform the operation, and then delete the site group if everything's successful. In terms of looking at site groups and what people do, the most common way site groups are configured is really by region. And that is often determines what installers have access to a site. So it could typically be a region within a country where different installers might have access to different regions within a country. Other ways it includes customers. There might be key customers that certain installers need access to. And installer responsibilities tends to be a big one. It tends to follow region or security level or customer or site importance. Single operation, as I said with my firmware upgrade, is very common. And temporary one-time operations are also very common. So I hope this video was of help. Please look at our other videos on this YouTube channel. Thank you very much, and hope to see you in the next video.